Imagine a massive construction site in the middle of snow-covered 13th century Europe. It's 15 degrees below zero outside. An icy wind is knocking people off their feet, and there isn't a single crane or heat gun in sight.
Modern building codes tell us that in such weather, all work must be stopped immediately, and everyone must seek shelter.
But in the Middle Ages, construction didn't stop even in the most bitter cold, when birds froze in mid-flight. Kings, barons, and bishops were very impatient clients and demanded results right here and now. It sounds like pure madness, but these people built cathedrals that still stand today. Let's figure out how they managed to defy the laws of physics and survive in conditions that seem impossible today.
This is a story not just about stones, but about extraordinary human endurance and ingenuity.
In those days, the concept of a construction schedule had a much harsher meaning than it does in modern construction companies. If you're building a castle to defend the border, enemies won't wait until spring for your mortar to warm up. Halting work for several months meant massive financial losses and the risk that the unfinished walls would simply collapse under the weight of the snow. The craftsmen understood that preserving the site cost more than continuing work in extreme cold. Often the budget was limited, and builders had to complete the project by a certain church holiday or the monarch's visit. Modern managers call this a deadline, but back then, missing a deadline could cost you your head, not a bonus. That's why work continued even when the workers' fingers were literally freezing to the stone. The problem was that in the Middle Ages, the concept of seasonality, as we understand it, did not exist. Once construction on a castle began, it had to be completed as quickly as possible so that it could begin to benefit its owner. Every day of downtime cost a fortune, which went toward maintaining security and temporary camps. The workers couldn't afford a winter vacation either, since they had to feed their families every day. In those days, there was no unemployment insurance, so the cold was merely an annoying obstacle to earning a living. For a simple bricklayer, the choice was simple. Either you work in the cold or your family goes hungry.
It was a harsh economic reality that forced people to create true architectural marvels.
Many people today think that in the old days, everything was done slowly and lazily. In reality, the pace of construction on some cathedrals boggles the imagination of even modern engineers. In winter, daylight hours are shorter, so they had to work as intensely as possible from the first rays of the sun. Every hour counted because lighting a massive construction site with torches was too expensive and dangerous. In essence, it was a daily marathon for survival, where the prize was life itself and a finished project. Today we complain about poor Wi-Fi in the office, while looking at buildings constructed in 20-degree sub-zero temperatures. Just think about this contrast, and you'll understand just how resilient our ancestors were. Winter construction also required a special system for feeding the workers. A person in the cold burns calories at an incredible rate and needed to be constantly refueled. Hot soups and porridges were cooked in huge cauldrons right on site so that people wouldn't waste time traveling. It was a veritable assembly line where food was just as vital a resource as lime or hewn stone. Without high-calorie fuel, the human engine would have stalled after just a couple of hours of work in the icy wind. Employers understood this and tried to provide people with at least basic hot meals to keep up the pace. In a sense, it was a precursor to modern business lunches, only under far more extreme conditions. Sometimes the frost became so severe that even the most resilient craftsmen gave up. But these were exceptional cases, when the very metal of the tools began to crack from the cold. The rest of the time, the construction site resembled an anthill, oblivious to external conditions.
The willpower of those people was as hard as the granite they were working with.
They didn't wait for global warming. They simply picked up their tools and went about their work. This commands sincere respect and forces us to look at the historic buildings we're familiar with in a new light. Each of them is a monument not only to architecture, but also to incredible human stubbornness. To sum up this section, we can say that winter construction was a harsh necessity. It was not a choice in favor of comfort. It was a choice in favor of the survival of the system and society. People adapted to the climate far better than we can imagine in the age of central heating. They knew how to keep their bodies warm and how to make materials work against the laws of nature. This knowledge was their greatest asset and their only chance for success in a cold world. Next, we'll examine specific technical tricks that prevented stone and mortar from crumbling at the first spring thaw. These are truly ingenious engineering solutions that we would hardly have thought of today without computers. One of the main problems with winter construction was the stone itself, which behaved extremely capriciously in the cold. Did you know that natural stone contains a certain amount of moisture, known as quarry juice? If such a freshly quarried block is left in the cold, the water inside it freezes and expands. As a result, microcracks form in the stone, which over time can turn it into dust.
Medieval craftsmen knew about this effect long before scientists described the physics of water expansion.
That is why fresh stone was never left outdoors without protection. Otherwise, a whole month's work could go to waste. It was a real battle to preserve every cubic meter of this expensive building material. To save the stone from destruction, it had to be literally wrapped up and warmed. On construction sites, huge armfuls of straw, manure, and old rags were used to create a thermal insulation layer. Sometimes temporary wooden tents were erected around the wall under construction, inside which a fire was constantly kept burning. This created a unique microclimate where the temperature was just above freezing, which prevented the masonry from freezing. Stones were often warmed by fires before being laid so that their icy bodies wouldn't immediately cool the mortar. It was painstaking and hard work, requiring constant attention to detail and endless supplies of fuel. Imagine how much firewood was needed to heat an entire tower of the future castle. The blocks were often covered with special straw mats, woven by women and children in the surrounding villages. These mats were not merely bedding, but a strategically important element of protection against winter precipitation. If snow fell on the unhardened masonry and then froze, the wall could lose its strength permanently.
Therefore, at the end of each shift, every section of the work was carefully sealed with a layer of insulation.
The master builders inspected the quality of the covering just as strictly as the masonry itself. A single mistake by an assistant could mean that a huge section of the wall would have to be rebuilt in the spring. Quality control under such conditions was truly brutal, for the lives of all the future building's inhabitants were at stake. When it came to the construction of particularly important structures, such as cathedrals, measures to protect the stone were even stricter. The blocks could be stored in special enclosed sheds, where they were gradually acclimated to the cold. Too sudden a temperature change was also dangerous, so the stone was acclimated to winter gradually. This is similar to how we warm up a car in severe frost before driving off. Medieval engineers understood the thermal inertia of materials and tried to avoid sudden thermal shocks. They acted intuitively, but their conclusions almost always aligned with modern construction science. It's amazing how people without higher education understood such complex physical processes. By the way, heating stones by the fire had another important function: removing excess moisture from the surface. Mortar adhered much better to a dry, warm stone, creating a strong bond at the molecular level. If mortar is applied to an icy block, it instantly forms a thin crust of ice, and no bond will form. As a result, such a wall would hold only under its own weight until the first serious storm hit. The masons carefully ensured that every stone was ready to meet the line. This slowed down the work process, but guaranteed that the castle wouldn't turn into a pile of rubble in a couple of years. Quality was more important than speed, even though deadlines were always closing in on the builders from all sides. Imagine the logistics of heating a massive construction site amid a shortage of resources. Hundreds of people were employed solely to carry firewood, tend the fires, and adjust the straw mats. It was an entire army of heating engineers, without whom the masons' work would have been simply impossible. Heating costs could account for a significant portion of the total winter construction budget. But clients accepted these expenses, realizing that the alternative was a complete halt to the project. As a result, the cost per square meter in the Middle Ages during winter rose just as it does today. The economics of construction have changed far less over the past 1,000 years than we might think. Ultimately, the technique of wrapping stone allowed work to continue even in sub-zero temperatures. This required enormous effort, but the result was worth it. Cities grew and fortresses grew stronger. Stone, protected by straw and warmed by a bonfire, became part of a history that outlived its creators. Today, we often forget these details when looking at the dry facts in history textbooks. But behind every fact stands a real person who watched the fire all night long so that the wall wouldn't freeze. This is true engineering, the ability to use available resources to solve impossible problems. And in this regard, medieval craftsmen were true geniuses of their time. If the stone was the skeleton of a building, then the mortar was its muscles and ligaments. And in winter they functioned quite differently. The main problem was lime, which in those days served as the primary binding agent for masonry. Under normal conditions, lime mortar takes quite a long time to set, gradually absorbing carbon dioxide from the air. But if the water in the mortar freezes before the chemical reaction begins, the entire mixture turns into a useless, icy slush. In the spring, when the ice melts, such mortar simply flows out of the joints, and the wall collapses like a house of cards. Therefore, the builder's main task was to prevent the water from freezing inside the fresh masonry. It was a real battle of practical chemists against the laws of thermodynamics. First, the builders began heating the water for mixing the mortar, bringing it almost to a boil. The hot water accelerated the slaking of the lime, triggering a violent chemical reaction that released its own heat. The result was a sort of self-heating mixture that could withstand the frost for some time.
The craftsmen worked very quickly, trying to use the mortar while it was still steaming from the heat.
This was dangerous because hot lime is extremely caustic and can cause serious burns on the skin. But the workers had no choice but to get used to constant contact with this aggressive substance. In those days, no one had heard of rubber gloves, so the builders' hands were covered in permanent scars and cracks. Sometimes, to heat the mortar, they used red-hot stones or metal balls, which they threw directly into the trough of lime. This allowed them to maintain the mixture's temperature even when the bonfires outside began to die down in the wind. The workers constantly stirred the mortar so that the heat would be distributed evenly and no frozen lumps would form. It was hard physical labor, leaving every muscle and joint aching by evening. Imagine this, stirring a thick, caustic, and hot mixture all day long in the icy wind. This was not a job for the faint of heart. It required immense endurance and fortitude. But it was precisely these efforts that created the invisible glue that has held our cathedrals together for 800 years. Interestingly, medieval builders noticed a connection between water quality and the frost resistance of the mortar. They tried not to take water from stagnant swamps, preferring clean river or well water. They understood that impurities could unpredictably affect the setting of lime in low-temperature conditions. Although they did not know chemistry as we understand it, their empirical observations were remarkably accurate. The experience passed down from father to son served as a substitute for entire institutes of building materials. It was a living tradition that adapted to any changes in climate and working conditions. We have much to learn from these people in terms of observation and a practical approach to the work. Once the wall was ready, it was often covered with special covers made of wood and leather, inside which coal continued to burn. This created a greenhouse effect, allowing the mortar to set completely under optimal conditions.
Such heated structures were the pinnacle of medieval construction ingenuity, enabling the erection of complex arches even in January.
Of course, this required enormous amounts of wood and constant supervision by the stoker. A single, unattended fire could burn down the entire construction site, along with the scaffolding and workers' tools. The risk of fire was a constant companion of winter construction, adding gray hairs to the masters and owners. But without this fire, the stone would have remained just a pile of cobblestones, unbound by the great power of lime. To conclude this chapter, it is worth noting that the mortar was the most vulnerable part of winter construction. But it was precisely thanks to the ingenuity of the craftsmen that this risk was minimized, resulting in incredibly durable structures. Every joint in an old wall is the result of a battle between heat and cold, chemistry and physics. We see only a gray strip between the stones, but behind it lie tons of burned firewood and thousands of broken eggs. This is a story of how the human mind finds a way out of a dead end, using the most unexpected resources at hand. And the next time you walk past an ancient wall, just touch it with your hand. You'll feel the cold of the stone, but know this: once upon a time, it was warmed by the heat of human labor and hot lime. Have you ever wondered what people wore while working 40 meters up in the air in the biting cold? They didn't have merino thermal underwear, membrane jackets, or lightweight down jackets, which we value so much today. The main and practically the only material for winter clothing in those days was natural wool. But this wasn't the soft wool found in boutiques. It was coarse, prickly, and very dense cloth, impregnated with animal fat, lanolin. Such clothing had a unique property. It continued to keep a person warm even if it became completely soaked with sweat or snow. Lanolin acted as a natural water-repellent layer, preventing moisture from penetrating deep into the fabric fibers. It was the best workwear nature could offer in the 13th century. Medieval workers used the principle of layering, which we today consider a great discovery of modern hikers. First came a linen shirt, which absorbed sweat, followed by several layers of woolen tunics and capes. On top, they wore a leather apron or vest, which protected the fabric from mechanical damage and sparks from bonfires. The head was always covered by a thick woolen hood, a kukul, which also covered the neck and shoulders. Such attire transformed a person into a sort of multi-layered cocoon, capable of retaining body heat for many hours. Of course, such clothing was very heavy and restricted movement, but that was a small price to pay to avoid frostbite. Imagine what it's like to haul stones while wearing 10 kilograms of wet wool. Interestingly, the builder's clothing often had a very distinct odor, a mixture of sweat, wet wool, smoke, and goat fat. To a modern person, this scent would seem unbearable, but back then no one paid it any mind. The smell was a sign of a hardworking person who was right in the thick of things and striving for results. The wool absorbed all the surrounding smells perfectly, turning every worker into a walking encyclopedia of the construction site. But it was precisely this heavy, dense layer of fabric that kept people from turning into ice statues atop the cathedrals. Without sheep's wool, the history of medieval architecture would have been much shorter and more boring. We should be grateful to ordinary sheep for helping us build our cities. During the harshest cold spells, workers practiced a method of collective warming, huddling close to one another during short breaks. Social bonds on the construction site were very strong, since your life and health often depended on your partner. If one person began to show signs of hypothermia, they were immediately sent to the fire or rubbed down with woolen rags. It was a harsh school of survival, where everyone understood the value of human warmth in the literal sense. Teamwork was not just a fancy term from management manuals, but a matter of survival. The cold showed no mercy to selfishness, forcing people to stick together for the sake of a common goal and safety. This made construction crews some of the most cohesive communities of that time. Modern construction workers in bright orange vests and hard hats look like astronauts compared to their predecessors. We have heated seats in excavators and electric insoles in our boots, which makes working in the winter quite bearable. But try spending even an hour outside in -10 degrees, just standing still, and you'll feel the breath of history. You'll realize that a woolen tunic isn't just clothing, but a thin line between life and death. And that barrier was very fragile, given all the risks of medieval construction. Nevertheless, people managed, proving that human adaptability knows almost no bounds. Wool and sweat. That is what the foundation of our civilization truly rests upon. At the end of this chapter, I'd like to remind you that behind every great monument stand not only the names of architects, but also nameless workers. Those very guys in prickly hoods who warmed their hands with their breath and dreamed of a bowl of hot porridge. Their contribution to history is no less important than brilliant blueprints and royal decrees. They were the flesh and blood of the construction site, its main driving force, and its most vulnerable part. The frost was their eternal enemy, but they learned to play by its rules and win. And looking at their work hundreds of years later, we can only marvel at their resilience and strength. Wool, sweat, and an unyielding will, the perfect recipe for building eternity. Working with tools in the winter turned into a form of torture rarely described in historical novels. Imagine having to pick up an iron chisel or hammer that had been lying out in the freezing cold all night. At such temperatures, metal becomes searingly cold, and touching it with bare skin can cause instant freezing. If you try to pull your hand away, the skin will remain on the tool, causing the workers unbearable pain. To avoid this, tool handles were often wrapped in leather or coarse cloth to create a protective barrier. But even this didn't always help, as the cold still seeped through any barriers. The tool became an extension of the frozen hand, and it became increasingly difficult to control with each passing hour. Work precision in the cold dropped dramatically, as frozen fingers lose sensitivity and fine motor skills. A stonemason had to strike with pinpoint accuracy to avoid splitting an expensive block of stone. But when you can't feel your hands, the hammer starts to wander, and the chisel slips at the worst possible moment. This led to a huge amount of defective work and injuries, which took a very long time to heal in the winter and were extremely painful. The craftsmen tried to do the most critical work at noon, when the sun warmed the air and their hands at least a little, but the short daylight hours forced them to rush, which only increased the risk of mistakes. It was a constant balancing act between the necessary speed and the desired quality of workmanship. Injuries on winter construction sites were commonplace, and they were met with a frightening stoicism. If a worker dropped a hammer on his foot because his hand had gone numb from the cold, he would simply bandage the wound with a rag and continue working. In those days, there were no sick leaves, and a replacement for your spot could be found very quickly. The fear of losing one's job was stronger than the pain from bruises and cuts, which forced people to ignore their body's warning signs. Winter was a time of tough people who weren't in the habit of complaining about their lot in life or the bad weather. They knew that their tools were their sole means of livelihood, and they treated them with almost religious reverence. A broken tool was a personal tragedy that could leave an entire family without a livelihood. By the way, on winter construction sites, special wooden cases were often used to store tools during breaks. These boxes were stuffed with dry wool or sawdust to prevent the metal from cooling to extreme temperatures. This allowed the worker to start their shift with a relatively warm tool, giving them a head start of a couple of hours of normal work. Such small details and tricks were the essence of professional craftsmanship, which was passed down only within closed workshops. Every detail of the process was optimized to combat the cold, turning the construction site into a well-oiled machine. Today we call this lean manufacturing, but for them, it was simply common sense. Common sense and experience. That's what replaced modern operating manuals for them. Workers often worked in pairs, with one holding the chisel and the other striking it with a heavy hammer. This required perfect synchronization and trust, especially when both hands were trembling from the cold. One wrong move, and the heavy hammer would come crashing down on the partner's fingers, turning them into a bloody mess. To conclude this chapter, it is worth noting that a tool was sacred to a worker, whom he cared for better than himself. In winter, this care became especially important, since the success of the entire endeavor depended on the condition of the metal. Every scratch on the chisel could cause it to break, so the tool was constantly sharpened and inspected. People and metal worked in unison, creating something more than just a building. They created a history that has been frozen in stone and iron for many centuries. And even though their hands were scarred and their fingers stiff with arthritis, their work lives on. This is the highest reward for any craftsman, to see your creation triumph over time and the cold. Wood played no less an important role than stone in winter construction, but it brought its own specific problems. Have you ever heard trees crackling in the forest during a severe frost? This is because the sap inside the fibers freezes, turning to ice and creating enormous internal tension in the wood. Medieval carpenters knew that in the cold, wood becomes very brittle and can snap at the slightest impact. This made erecting scaffolding and roof trusses a deadly, dangerous task. A beam that could support the weight of 10 people in the summer might simply snap in half in the winter without any warning. Working at heights under such conditions required incredible intuition and caution from the carpenters. Scaffolding built to enormous heights for the construction of towers and cathedrals was particularly dangerous. The wooden structures were constantly exposed to moisture, which froze in the joints and connections. The ice expanded the holes for the pegs and loosened the rope ties, turning a stable structure into a precarious trap. Every morning, carpenters began by inspecting the scaffolding, tapping each joint and checking the tension of the ropes. If frost patterns appeared on the wood, it could indicate hidden cracks invisible to the naked eye. A carpenter's mistake could lead to a catastrophe in which dozens of workers would die and months of labor would be destroyed. It was a job on a knife's edge, where your own vigilance was the only safety net. The ropes used to tie the scaffolding together also became a real nightmare for workers in the cold. A regular hemp rope, once wet and frozen, turned into a stiff, icy stick that was impossible to untie or tighten. Carpenters would coat the ropes with grease or tar to prevent them from absorbing moisture and to keep them flexible in any weather. Wooden roofs and rafters installed in winter had to withstand the enormous weight of snow that accumulated on them for months. Carpenters calculated the angles of inclination and the thickness of the beams with a margin of safety, knowing that nature would show them no mercy. They knew that fresh wood could bend under load and took this behavior of the material into account in their designs. They were instinctive mechanical engineers who did not know the formulas but sensed the forces acting within the wood. Their buildings withstood snowfalls that today cause the roofs of modern shopping centers to collapse. This suggests that their understanding of materials was far deeper and more practical than our theoretical one. Wood was their ally in the fight against the cold, provided they knew how to handle it properly. Today we use glued laminated timber, which hardly changes its properties with temperature, and steel fasteners that aren't affected by rope knots. Our scaffolding is made of metal, and workers are secured with safety harnesses to reliable anchors. But the spirit of carpentry remains the same. It is the ability to see the structure of the material and understand its limitations. The cold turned their work into an art of survival, where every swing of the axe mattered. And although wood is not as durable as stone, it was precisely wood that allowed stone to rise to incredible heights. It was the union of two materials and human will that conquered the harsh winters of the Middle Ages. The fragile wooden skeleton became the foundation for the eternal stone walls we see today. Starting construction from scratch in winter was the most difficult task because the first thing that had to be done was to dig the foundation in the frozen ground. In winter, the soil turns into a substance as hard as granite, and ordinary shovels simply break against it. If the foundation is laid incorrectly, the ground will shift in the spring as it thaws, and the entire building will tilt fatally. The craftsmen understood that preparing the foundation was the most critical phase, where not even the slightest haste could be allowed. Therefore, before starting to dig, the ground had to be literally thawed by hand. It was an incredibly labor-intensive process, requiring a colossal amount of firewood and the patience of the entire construction crew. It sounds like an impossible task, but for medieval builders, it was simply another step in the process. The main method of dealing with permafrost was huge bonfires, which were lit right where the future trenches would be. The fire burned for several days, gradually warming the ground to a depth of half a meter or a meter. Once the fire had burned out, the workers quickly dug into the thawed soil before it turned to stone again. When the trenches were ready, their bottoms were often lined with a layer of large stones or gravel to create drainage. This was especially important in winter, as excess water had to be diverted from the foundation before it froze. The masons used the natural slopes of the terrain and built complex drainage systems even before the main masonry work began. They understood the site's hydrology better than many modern surveyors with their electronic devices. Generations of experience told them where water would pool and where it would quickly seep into the ground. A foundation built in winter required double quality control at every stage of material placement. It was meticulous work, where every stone laid was checked for stability and proper positioning. Interestingly, the foundations of some cathedrals were built over decades, and winter was merely a brief interlude in this endless process. The craftsmen knew that the foundation had to settle and go through several freeze-thaw cycles before walls could be erected on it. This allowed them to identify weak spots and correct errors in design or execution in a timely manner. Modern builders use powerful excavators with hydraulic hammers that break up frozen soil in a matter of minutes. We have concrete with anti-freeze additives that can be poured directly into icy water without losing strength. But we often forget that our technologies are merely improved versions of the very methods used by those medieval craftsmen. The principle remains the same. You need to prepare a solid foundation, protect it from water, and allow the materials to set properly. Medieval builders did this using bonfires and manual labor, demonstrating incredible ingenuity. Their foundations are not just stones in the ground, they are a testament to human perseverance and engineering ingenuity. We stand on their shoulders in the literal sense of the word, reaping the fruits of their hard winter labor. To conclude this chapter, we can say that the battle for the foundation was the most invisible, yet the most crucial part of winter construction. The people who dug trenches in the frozen ground rarely made it into the chronicles, but the fate of the entire project depended on them. Frost was their main enemy, and fire was their only ally in this endless struggle. When we look at the majestic walls of ancient castles, we must remember that beneath them lie meters of stone, laid in ice and flame. The foundation is the hidden part of history that supports all the splendor of the past. And this part of history was written on the coldest days, when only human will could force the earth to obey. Winter in the northern latitudes brings not only cold, but also catastrophically short daylight hours. In December and January, builders had only about 6 to 7 hours of full daylight to work. This created a huge problem because the scope of work didn't decrease and deadlines kept looming. Every minute counted, and being late for the start of a shift was considered a serious offense. Foremen were forced to organize work so as to make the most of every second of daylight. It was a real race against time, where the sun was the sole and very strict judge. The short days forced people to work at a pace that seems superhuman to us today. To extend working hours, construction sites were lit by a vast number of torches and oil lamps. This was an expensive endeavor, as high-quality oil and resin cost a considerable amount of money and required constant replenishment. The light from the torches was uneven and flickering, casting deep, frightening shadows that hindered precise work. Bricklayers had to rely on their sense of touch and muscle memory more than on their eyesight. Working in the dim light at such heights was extremely dangerous, as it was easy to overlook an icy patch or the edge of the scaffolding. But the construction site could not wait for dawn, and the workers continued to lay stones under the ghostly light of the open fire. This created a surreal scene, reminiscent of scenes from mystical legends rather than a real construction process. The short days also affected the workers' psychological state, causing a constant sense of anxiety and urgency. People understood that they had no room for error or slowness, as the sun would not wait for them. This led to high levels of stress, which today would be called burnout. But even on weekends, the workers often came to the site to check the condition of the scaffolding and the integrity of the masonry. Their responsibility for the project never left them for a moment. It had become part of their very being and destiny. Winter construction was their life, their challenge, and their personal battlefield against the elements. And the sunlight was their most cherished reward for all the hardships they had endured. When spring arrived and the days grew longer, the pace of work, paradoxically, did not slow down but increased. The builders tried to make the most of the extra daylight to make up for the winter slowdown. But it was precisely their winter experience of working in conditions of limited light that made them incredibly efficient and disciplined. To conclude this chapter, I would like to note that light in the Middle Ages was a sacred concept, especially on cathedral construction sites. Every window and every stained glass panel was designed to capture as much of this divine gift as possible. Working in the twilight of winter made the craftsmen feel even more keenly the importance of light for architecture and life. They built structures that themselves became sources of light and inspiration for future generations. And though their torches have long since gone out and their lamps have dried up, the light of their labor continues to shine in every stone they laid. The race against the light was won, and the result was masterpieces that do not fear the darkness of the ages. We are the heirs to this light, which was mined during the shortest and coldest days in history. Frost brought builders not only suffering, but also unexpected technological advantages, especially when it came to transportation. In the Middle Ages, roads often turned into impassable swamps in the summer, where carts loaded with stone would get stuck up to their axles. In the winter, however, the frozen ground became an ideal surface, capable of withstanding enormous loads without any damage. Craftsmen used this period to deliver the heaviest and largest blocks to the construction site, blocks that could not be moved at other times of the year. Sleds gliding over ice and packed snow required far less pulling power than wheeled carts. In a sense, winter was the high season for logistics, turning the entire region into one giant highway. It was a paradoxical moment when the cold became the supplier's best friend. To transport particularly massive stones, builders used enormous sleds, the runners of which were sometimes even deliberately doused with water to create an icy crust. On such a skating rink, a multi-ton block could be pulled by just one or two oxen, whereas in summer, a whole team would have been required. The frost made the surface slippery and hard, allowing roots to be laid directly across frozen swamps and rivers. To ensure uninterrupted delivery of materials to the construction site, special winter roads were created, which were constantly cleared of excess snow. Hundreds of peasants with wooden shovels kept the roads in working order, ensuring the flow of cargo to the construction site. It was a massive organizational effort, comparable to modern traffic management in a metropolis. The foreman monitored the weather forecast using folk signs, trying to predict severe blizzards or sudden thaws. A thaw was more dangerous than any frost, as it instantly turned the icy road into slush, blocking all transportation. The ability to stop or speed up the caravan at the right moment was the key to the success of the entire winter logistics operation. Sometimes the winter road became the scene of real drama when the ice beneath the heavy sleds began to crack at the most inopportune moment. The drivers possessed incredible intuition and hearing, capable of detecting the sound of cracking ice long before a disaster struck. They knew when to drop everything and run, and when to spur the horses on and speed through the dangerous stretch. They were true heroes of logistics, whose names rarely made it into history, but without whom there would be no castles. Risk was their constant companion, and the frost, a harsh but fair business partner. They loved winter for its firmness and predictability, preferring it to the treacherous spring mud and summer dust. Ice logistics was the art of harnessing the elements for the sake of human dreams. Today we use powerful all-wheel drive trucks with heated cargo beds to transport materials in any weather. Our roads are treated with de-icing agents, and logistics are managed by satellites and complex algorithms. But the essence remains the same. We need to deliver cargo from point A to point B as quickly and cheaply as possible, regardless of the climate. This invisible part of construction, logistics, deserves our admiration no less than the art of architecture itself. Without sleds, studded horseshoes, and frozen rivers, our cities would look very different. Winter gave us speed and possibilities that we realized in stone, iron, and wood. And this is yet another victory of the human mind over the cold and the vastness of space. When we look at majestic Gothic cathedrals and impregnable castles, we often forget that they are the result of a struggle against the harshest climate. These buildings have stood for 800 years, not thanks to modern technology, but in spite of the lack of it as we understand it. Medieval craftsmen proved that human will and a deep understanding of nature can replace any machines or computers. Winter construction was not an anomaly for them, but a regular challenge that they accepted with dignity and professional pride. Their methods are the quintessence of practical experience accumulated over millennia of life in the northern latitudes. Today, we simply reap the fruits of their incredible perseverance, often without realizing the scale of their feat. The legacy of the past is, above all, a legacy of resilience and craftsmanship in extreme conditions. Winter construction also shaped a unique work culture where mutual aid, discipline, and personal courage were valued. The builders' cooperatives were the prototypes of modern, efficient teams capable of solving tasks of any complexity in the shortest possible time. Their social structure and professional ethics allowed them to preserve knowledge and pass it down through generations, despite wars and epidemics. This continuity is what makes our civilization strong and resilient to any historical frosts. We are the heirs not only of stones, but also of these invisible bonds between people united by a common goal and labor. The cold brought people closer together, forcing them to appreciate human warmth and professional support in the literal sense. This is an important lesson in social architecture that remains relevant today. The modern world often seems too complex and fragile to us, especially when natural disasters or economic crises strike. At such moments, it is helpful to remember the people who built cathedrals in 20-degree sub-zero weather without even gloves or flashlights. Their example proves that human potential is practically limitless if one has a clear goal and the will to achieve it. We often overestimate the role of gadgets and underestimate the role of character and practical skills in our lives. The history of medieval construction is a powerful injection of optimism and faith in the strength of the common person, armed with knowledge and tools. We are capable of more than we realize if we stop fearing difficulties and start using them as a springboard. Winter is a time of growth for those who aren't afraid to freeze. Looking at old photographs and engravings, we see snow-covered forests at construction sites and tiny figures of people in hoods. These people created the world we live in, laying the foundations of our culture, law, and architecture in the frozen ground. Their stone legacy is not just tourist attractions. It is a message to us about how to approach life and work. Today we build differently, but the goals remain the same: to create a space for life, protection, and inspiration. May the experience of medieval masters inspire us to new achievements and help us overcome any winter in life. We can build our future just as reliably and beautifully as they built their cathedrals, with a love for the craft and respect for the material. Frost is merely a state of the atmosphere, while craftsmanship is a state of the soul that does not depend on temperature. May our legacy be as strong and inspiring as the stone walls erected in the frost without machinery. We are part of a great chain of creators, and our time is our chance to leave our mark on history. Thank you to those who built in the frost for teaching us to be strong. In summary, we can say that building in the Middle Ages in the freezing cold was a true technological and human miracle. The people of that time possessed a unique set of knowledge and skills that allowed them to work effectively in conditions that seem unbearable to us today. They didn't just survive, they created, turning the cold, ice, and short days into tools of their craft. Every castle, bridge, or cathedral built during those harsh winters is a monument to unyielding human will and engineering genius. We learned how wool saved lives, how hot lime warmed the walls, and how the frost helped transport stones across the ice. It was an era when people were harder than stone and colder than ice in their pursuit of a great goal. May this story remind us that for a true master, there are no insurmountable obstacles, only new challenges. And the next time you see an ancient wall beneath the snow, know this: it feels right at home, for it was born in the very heart of winter.